It's Friday, May 30th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. 2 weeks ago, there was a piece in the Washington Post that really caught my eye, and I just couldn't shake it after I read it. It was a piece about the convenient lie we tell ourselves about what happened to the great American manufacturing job that we said went overseas to places like China or Canada or Mexico. And I think that I couldn't shake this piece because, well, for starters, I like ideas that turn things we think we know on their heads. I think that's interesting, and I think they should be talked about. And second, I'm recording this in Detroit, the heart of the Rust Belt, once the beating heart of American manufacturing that both Joe Biden and Donald Trump and Democrats and Republicans writ large talk about as the great backbone of America. And in the middle 1900s, in the late 1900s, was the way that we produced wealth for the middle class, and that we lost all that because these jobs went overseas. But what this writer said was that that's only a piece of the puzzle, and maybe a smaller one than we're all willing to admit. It's why I'm thrilled today to have you listen to my conversation with Middlebury College professor Gary Winslett, who wrote this piece all about how it's not just that jobs went overseas. It's that these manufacturing jobs flew south for the winter, that we have the Rust Belt now because a lot of these jobs went to the south, and that in that convenient story we tell ourselves about where these jobs went, there are some pretty inconvenient things that both Republicans and Democrats have to wrestle with when it comes to why these jobs went south. But before we get to that, please follow and subscribe to the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching it there, and sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It is just $5 a month. All right, let's get to my conversation with Middlebury College professor Gary Winslett. I read this article when it first came out, and it stuck with me all day. It was one of these things where I read it and I was like, that's fascinating. I live in Detroit right now. And
okay,
the idea of bringing back manufacturing, bringing the city back, the surrounding area back to what it was in the 1970s and 80s is, as you can imagine, a pretty big topic of conversation around.
I'm sure I'll get into this, but like my wife's family's from Michigan.
Sure.
I have like tons of sympathy. Like, you know, there's only so much you can say when they give you this many words in the Washington Post. But like one of the things that I like about podcasts is you can have a little more space. And actually, like a lot of my argument, and we'll get into this, but a lot of my argument around this comes from actually like a deep sympathy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is where I was coming from when I was reading that. But also I've lived in Texas. I lived in Oklahoma for a long time. And I saw those shifts. And we'll talk about this too as we go here, because I think there are some interesting things that I have questions about. But let's start with walk me through what you're talking about. I really actually enjoyed the like Big Ten versus SEC analogy. That was really good. But walk me through this thing. So when we talk about globalization and the end of manufacturing as we understood it in the middle 1900s, it's not as much as these jobs leaving to other countries as it is just shifting the states they're in. Is that right?
To some degree, but so it's not just about jobs. It's also about manufacturing output, right? So think about all of the things that we make. Well, a lot of those are for domestic consumption, but a lot of those get exported too. And so if you look at exports, that's one way of just looking at like, okay, well, who's like making the globally competitive stuff, right? And in 1970, about half of manufacturing exports in the United States came from the Rust Belt, and a little less than a quarter came from the southern states. So, well, if you look at 2020, 50 years later, it's the reverse. It's been totally flipped. Now about half of manufacturing exports come from the South, and less than a quarter are from the Rust Belt.
So why do we continue to talk about the Rust Belt in this way then?
So I think for some people in some places in the Rust Belt, the decline of manufacturing was experienced as a kind of economic trauma. The factory closes, young people leave, the tax base shrinks, there's fewer jobs, there's less, there's less prosperity. And the other thing that happens is like when the factory closes, a lot of times it doesn't just get like deleted. Like it's still there. It's just crumbling. And so between the visual and the aesthetic of crumbling and the sense that it used to be better, there is, most of America has gotten more prosperous over the last couple of decades. But there are pockets, Eastern Ohio, that used to be more prosperous than they are now. And that sort of felt sense of decline is very visceral and it's very sympathetic.
Sure. I mean, in Detroit, there are places you can go, and they remain these monuments to that economic trauma. Absolutely. Even still, as the city's on a comeback right now, and it's still like that in places.
Yes, 100%. And so that's part of the reason why we talk about it, is because in many respects, it is a deeply sympathetic story. Like those are your fellow Americans who fell on hard economic times. And so that's why we talk about it. But so in what I do, like I'm a trade policy scholar, I, teach international political economy. If you're thinking about the decline of manufacturing employment in these areas, there's three like suspects in the crime, if you will. And the first suspect, which gets a lot of press, is globalization. China stole your job, NAFTA stole your job, right? These factories closed because new factories opened up overseas. And that's who took all the jobs. And that's a really convenient story, which is why it gets the most press, right? It's really convenient to say that the foreigner screwed you over. It's really convenient to be like, the greedy corporation did labor arbitrage, right? It presents a nice villain. It's an outsider who hurt you, right?
It reminds me of some of the like straw man arguments a little bit that we often hear in politics. In that if you blame China, you blame the member countries of NAFTA or the USMCA now, or whatever it's going to be when they plan to negotiate that. Those folks can't answer us, right? Someone from China is not going to beat back every time you say it. If you said that about Alabama from Michigan, right? A senator from Alabama is going to be pretty pissed.
Well, pretty pissed, or not even pissed, but just say like, look, this was like our right to develop as we wanted to. I grew up in Alabama, and it used to be a poor place. Like for long stretches of the 20th century, it was in deep poverty compared to much of the rest of the country. And what a lot of people from Alabama would say, and I mean, my dad worked at a steel plant in Birmingham in the 90s. My uncle helped build one of the first auto plants in the state. What they would say is like, we've got every right to not want to be poor. Like, and if that means we do permitting faster, and if that means we do right to work, like that's a deal we're willing to take. And like, it's not like you're intentionally trying to like punch the guy in Ohio. You don't hate him, right? Like that's not the dynamic, but it is like, look, this new auto factory would bring a lot of jobs and a lot of investment to this place where people don't have good jobs. And there isn't a lot of it. So it's like, that's the feel, I would say, of what the response you would get.
Sure. Walk me through the argument that you lay out in this article. Obviously, it will be linked in the show notes for this, but walk me through this thing.
Okay, so the argument goes that a lot of our manufacturing industrial base moved from the Rust Belt to southern states, right? Whenever you need to open a new factory, maybe you open it in South Carolina instead of Ohio, or you open it in Alabama instead of Michigan. And so why did so much of our industrial base move south from the Rust Belt? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one, it's not the only one, but it's an important one, is right to work. If you're capital and you're thinking about where do I set up the factory? Well, if you can set it up in a place where you're pretty guaranteed not to have to deal with production disruptions due to strikes, that's attractive. You can try to do things to, really make your employees happy so that they don't want to unionize, right? Like you can do all kinds of team structures and a lot of, manufacturers in the South have adopted a lot of like Japanese style organizations, which typically makes workers happier anyway. And like they pay well, right? Like, a manufacturing job in Montgomery, Alabama pays a lot better than like, some of the other jobs in the area. So you try to make your workers happy. But anyway, they like not having to deal with unions, basically. And unionization rates in the South are much lower. So the unionization rate in North Carolina is 2.4%. And that's mostly like police and firefighters and teachers, like public. Like in the private sector, there are very few unionized workers. South Carolina, it's 2.8. Georgia, it's under 4. Texas is under 4. These are a third of the rates of the unionization in the Rust Belt. So that's part of it, is right to work. I don't want to like overstate that, but it is an important part. The next biggest part is electricity. And this is the one that gets overlooked a lot. For all kinds of reasons, but including fossil fuels, the South is able to offer cheap industrial electricity. That's really important for a lot of manufacturing. So there are 10 states in the South that have industrial electricity rates under 8 cents per kilowatt hour. There are no states in the Rust Belt that do that. And even the Rust Belt is cheaper than New England, the East Coast, and the West Coast. Those are way higher electricity rates.
Right. It's just not feasible in those places. Yeah.
It's not feasible. Well, and there are some policy differences that matter too. One of the things I go into in the article is that Ohio has some of the most wind restrictive rules in the country. It's just really hard to build wind turbines in Ohio. You know where they don't make it hard to build wind turbines? Texas. You got some property, you want to put up some wind turbines, they're like, go ahead, knock yourself out. Wind is intermittent, right? Sometimes it's windy, sometimes it's not. But when it's blowing, that electricity is cheap, like capital C cheap. And that's great. If you're a manufacturer, you're like, okay, I have nearly free electricity. Cool. And then you've also got permitting differences that are really important. So in California, you want to build anything, it is a nightmare. Absolutely. I mean, they will put you through the ringer. Whereas Georgia, they're like, oh, you want to build a factory? Cool. We have a fast track process. We'll help you find the land. We'll help make sure that it's got all the infrastructure, sewer, water, electricity hookups it needs. We'll work with you to make sure the roads work. We'll get this done quickly so you can get rolling with your production because we like jobs. That is just a night and day permitting difference. And so if you're a capital owner looking at where to like put a new factory, that's another thing that makes you want to go south, is that they'll work with you on land and permitting.
Right. Your time from investment to actually having something that is creating money for you is faster and easier.
100%. And on top of that, so here's what the South didn't do. The South didn't start growing and then decide, oh, no, we can't build new housing. Right? Like that's what California did. It was like they started growing. They were growing like gangbusters in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. And they're like, whoa. We're full of people here. We got to stop. The South didn't do that. It just kept building houses. There's a whole, in the article I go to, there's this whole group of southern states that every single one of them have built more housing per capita than a whole group of blue states. Every single year since 1993. Not just like a one-off thing. Like for decades, they've been building more housing. And so a worker might be willing to accept slightly less money in South Carolina than in California because they can buy a house for like $300,000. Whereas like you can't buy a parking spot in San Diego for $300,000. Right? So you would never accept $22 an hour to work in the factory in San Diego because like how?
How could you? You couldn't survive.
You couldn't survive. Right. And so if you're a manufacturer wanting to pay people, I don't know, $22, $23 an hour, you're not going to put it in a place where you can't get workers because they can't afford it. You're going to put it in a place where like, oh yeah, like a middle-class person will be like, sure, 23 an hour sounds good. I can buy a house now.
Yeah. The way that I understood some of these things, and actually before I go, is there anything else that I'm missing here on your points? There's one more thing.
Immigration.
Right? Yeah, that was the last one. Yes, immigration.
So I'm sure we'll get into this, but parts of this story challenge both parties. And one of the parts that challenges Republicans is that immigration has massively helped the South. Like, who do you think builds all the houses in Texas and Florida? Like, you don't have to be deep in the construction industry to recognize that immigrant labor is a huge, not like literally every person on the job site, but it's a huge portion. And immigrants are customers. They help the economy grow faster. There's just a lot about immigration that has really helped the South. And the region with the least immigration in the country is the Midwest. And so you can just see how that's really helped this place take off while the other one hasn't taken off as much. And so that's the other big factor is immigration.
And what I was going to say is, and this actually, immigration is part of this, I sort of understood these things maybe as two broad categories, maybe three. But one of them is that there's just more open space in the South to do a lot of these things, whether it's to run energy transmission lines, whether it's to build housing, and whether it's to welcome in people. And depending on the state, welcome might be a strong word, but it's that they have the space to do these things. The regulatory stuff we can talk about next, but is that a factor here, that it's just places like Texas and Georgia are just bigger than Ohio and Massachusetts, and or is that too simple?
I think that's too simple. It's the allowing the building on the space, right? Like I live in Vermont. We got plenty of space here. It's wide open. We just don't let you build anything on it. It has to be open space forever because some hippies moved here in the 60s and 70s and really didn't want it developed. So it's like, it's not like the space helps, but you also have to be willing to let people build on the space. Interestingly enough, the only state in the country that has more stringent anti-wind rules than Ohio is Vermont. It's like de facto illegal. Like you because they can't be above certain decibel levels. So like they can't be above 39 decibels, which is basically a tiny quiet office. And they also can't cast shadows like over a certain piece of property more than like 30 minutes a day. And the setback rules are 10 times turbine height. So if you got the top of the turbine, that's 500 feet because you got to go up in the air to get the wind. You need a 1 mile setback from basically all other property. So take a wild guess. How many wind turbines have been built since these new rules got put in place? Like a whopping zero. It's just de facto illegal. And so it's like, I agree that space helps, but you do have to let people build on the space.
The other category here is the regulatory problems in a lot of these Rust Belt states, whether that is right to work and whether that is the permitting for building. And like a lot of talk has been, done and had about what I think is going to be the new Democratic vision going forward, which is the like Ezra Klein abundance thing. Does that fit into this though?
It does. I mean, the regulatory stuff is really important. And this is, I mentioned earlier how immigration really challenges parts of the Republican style of thinking, but Democrats at some point need to face down an outdated version of environmentalism. So back in the 60s, like the Cuyahoga River was catching on fire, right? Like we had like smog in Southern California. We didn't have a Clean Air Act. We didn't have a Clean Air Act. It was bad.
Yeah. It
was really bad. Like we needed that era of environmentalism, but it's actually like succeeded to a considerable degree. We have a much cleaner country than we used to. But now we have got this different kind of environmentalism that needs to be about building things. You got to build the wind turbines. You got to build the solar panels. You got to build the electric infrastructure so that we're electrifying everything, right? So the electricity bills don't go crazy in the summer when people run their AC, so that we have factories that need cheap electricity. And so that's a different kind of environmentalism than the kind of environmentalism that's like read the Lorax a lot.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's just new. And I think there's an older generation of environmentalists that like doesn't like it's for them. Environmentalism is about a whole set of values and beliefs that run together. Right. So like you can actually see this right now in a bill before Congress called the Fix Our Forest Act. And basically it's a showdown between these two different kinds of environmentalism, right? Because there's some people who like any tree cut down is bad. Like cutting down a tree ever, anywhere is just like they don't like it. Whereas like the Fix Our Forest Act comes from a position of like, actually you need to do active forest management so you don't get wildfires. And actually done appropriately, you can use some of the small diameter timber for housing construction. And it's sustainable because you're not clear cutting them all down at once or anything, but you can like do it in waves, basically in patches, and it's basically sustainable. And there's all kinds of other stuff in the act, but it's basically like this question of which kind of environmentalism Democrats are going to embrace. And it's open. It's an open question whether or not it gets through the Senate. We're still not sure.
Sort of a dichotomy between old school conservation and new school, I guess, like environmental construction. Is that even a thing? Like,
yeah, I think that would be right. Yeah. I mean, I typically just refer to it as like green energy enthusiasm, right? Because like that's the core of it. You know, like and like nuclear is a good example. For a long time, environmentalists did not like nuclear. It had bad vibes to them, and like, you know, Chernobyl was a real thing. I would chalk Chernobyl more up to like the Soviet Union sucked, as opposed to like nuclear is bad. But I get it. I understand why in 1984 nuclear might not have been your favorite thing. Like we're pretty good at it and being safe in the United States. It's just too expensive. And so like that's the thing that you're starting to see, I think, more people get on board with, which is helpful.
Talk to me about right to work, because I think this is such a thorny issue for Democrats. And I do want to go back to immigration in a little bit too, because I think when we talk about the two big issues that might get in the way for both parties, you've got right to work on the left and immigration on the right. But let's start with right to work. You know, the previous presidency, the previous administration was a self-proclaimed the most pro-labor. We saw a full year of real shifts in attitudes towards labor, unionizations in a lot of places. But what you're describing here, in order to bring back some of the manufacturing base, some of these job bases that we have come to understand in a lot of these blue states, does that mean turning away from labor?
No, but I do think it requires recognizing that only about 6% of private sector workers are unionized. There are plenty, and there are tens of millions of Americans work hard every day and are American laborers in every sense of the term labor. They're just not part of a union. Right? And I think that statement is one that like makes some parts of the party cringe, because they really like the idea of unions. Right? If you think in terms of, and I want to steel man the argument for a second, right? Like I really want to pay respect to this. If you think in strongly social class terms, right? Like, and you think that like the way to make workers do well is to be able to like have them stand up to management and force management to give it a bigger slice of the economic pie. If that's how you're thinking of it, then the way you help labor is help unions. They're synonymous. And it also has that social class structure orientation to it. And particularly if you are also a party that likes to think of itself as the party of the people who sign the backs of checks, not the fronts of checks, right? Like all of these things go together as a value set, and that they're very wedded to intellectually. That's what I would say is the steelman argument for that position. And that I think they would argue that what the South has done with right to work is basically undercut their fellow laborers elsewhere in a sort of, I mean, I think they might even use some pretty strong ones around like scabbing and stuff like that. I think that's how at least some of them see it. I think there's a lot of problems with that way of thinking. The first is that Americans in general, and I would include myself in this, don't love the kind of social class division precepts that emerges from, right? Like we like to think of ourselves as upwardly socially mobile, right? Like, okay, maybe you have like a working class income now, but you're hoping to move up in the world, right? You're hoping to get to the professional class. Right. Yeah. I mean, and I've gotten to live a version of this, right? So like, my dad worked in a steel mill and I am a professor, right? Like that's like part of what you want, and you want to like aspire for your kids to move up. So this idea of like coherent social classes that don't move and people don't like blend around in them is like just kind of odd and zero sum to a lot of us. And like also like, why would I have animosity to different people of different social classes? Like, I want to help the poor. I want a better social safety net. I want to spend more on poor kids. I know lots of working class people. I'm from a blue collar background. I'm a professor. I know plenty of professionals. Like, and I also like don't hate rich people. Like, like I think maybe some of the reconciliation bill policies around huge tax breaks right now is not a great idea. But I don't have personal animosity against rich people. I'm like, oh, you did well. Good for you. Right? Like, and so the whole like social class set of politics is just not one we like buy particularly strongly. And I also think it's like kind of unhelpful, right? Like, if you look at housing, a lot of bad housing policy is about injecting class where you shouldn't, right? Like, it's about keeping poor people out of the neighborhood. Or in, some blue places, there's a lot of anti-professional class sentiments that get bound up in like gentrification is awful and we can't allow new apartments to get constructed. So if you're like me and you think that social class politics is maybe not the most helpful, you don't start from there. And so that would be the first part of the problem with some of the unions equal labor arguments, is a lot of us would see like laborers as individuals in the labor market and we want to help them do well. And that's just a different thing than a social class politics. And then I want to say one more thing here before we keep rolling, is that the best guarantor of a laborer doing well in the labor market is not a union. It's the company down the street offering better terms. What you want, if you want to help workers, is a strong economy broadly, so that if some company is like not treating its workers well, they have a bajillion options to go somewhere else. This is also why you want to do a lot of jobs training. This one of the ways in which we really fail workers right now is we have an education model that's like, okay, you get educated until you're 18 or 22, and then you're done. And like, there's like very little help if you want to like transition careers when you're like 35 or 48. You're just like totally on your own. And like, to me, that's one of our big failures. We don't help people make those jumps. In Denmark, they do. In Denmark, they spend 20 times as much as a percentage of GDP on what these training policies that are called active labor market policies. Like, if you lose your job in Denmark, they help you get the skills to get a new one. And that's one of the things I think we're missing a lot. So to me, if you're going to help workers, it's not about like trying to recreate the like 1958 imagery. And I see a lot of the manufacturing nostalgia is wrapped up in like trying to recreate that period. And I just don't think that that's the way you actually help people in practice here in 2025.
Yeah. I do want to come to that at the end of this, because the president thinks about that in a very, very specific way. It's been written about a lot. I mean, he's, I guess, secondhand on record saying some of these things. But I want to ask about, when we talk about right to work, I think the other maybe part of a steelman argument is that unions helped keep workers safe for a long time and are behind a lot of these protections in the workplace. Is that also an outdated notion?
Well, I don't want to call it outdated because I suggest that it's false. If unions were extremely helpful in the Industrial Revolution part of America, like, like unions in the 1880s are absolutely essential, right? Unions in the 1950s were also absolutely essential. Workplaces are a lot safer now. You can just look at rates of industrial accidents, and they're just far, far lower than they used to be. Do unions have a hand in that? Absolutely. But do I begrudge somebody in Georgia for being like, well, the factory's safe now. I don't work in an 1880s coal mine. I work in a 2025 electric vehicle battery plant, which is different. So like I always try to have sympathy for the people on the ground. And one of the things that I tend to believe in very strongly is I don't know your situation better than you do. And if you on the ground don't want to vote for a union, like it's not my business to like come tell you have to.
Which to me, and a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here for the last 30 minutes or so has been the disconnect between the policy and the people, which is, it seems simple to say, but the chasm when we're talking about these things seems so big. What a failure. What a failure. And I think that rolls right into immigration as well. I mean, you're looking at the stuff that this administration in particular is trying to do with immigration. Just this will come out a week from when we're talking, but I just talked to listeners yesterday about the Supreme Court ruling about Venezuelans here in temporary protected status and how so many of those folks are living and working in Florida, and how that's just going to undercut so many of the southern economies here. So how does the policy of those things, how do you circle that square in these southern states?
It's bad. There was a New York Times, I can't remember if it was New York Times or Wall Street Journal. There was in one of those, there was an article about a month ago about how South Carolina's political and business leadership is absolutely aghast at everything the Trump administration's doing. Like there's a cultural conservatism there that pulls them into the Republican coalition. And yet the leaders of that coalition in DC are adopting all of these economic policies that are like capital U unhelpful to everything that they want to do. I think there's an opportunity for Democrats here. I think a certain kind of Bill Clinton Democrat could do really well in the South of the Sun Belt, socially moderate, but also being like, hey, look, all of these protectionist policies that the Republicans have put in place, not helping you. We're going to do free trade like NAFTA under Clinton.
The thing that I thought about as I was reading your piece was when I worked in Oklahoma, there was a big push to get a lot of investment into that state. And it's an energy state, right? It's oil and natural gas is their big thing there. But also they wanted to bring manufacturing and they wanted to bring some tech manufacturing into that state, and they just couldn't. And the same thing, to a much lesser degree, was happening in Texas at the same time, because the quality of life in those states was worse. And so the things you're talking about are trade policy, interstate trade policy, global trade policy. They are capital flow and economics of that thing. But in this shift from life in the Midwest to life in the South, obviously over the span of decades, do workers have to give up a certain quality of life, or was that also just inevitable?
I mean, it kind of depends on how one defines quality of life.
Sure. The same thing. I don't know your situation better than you do a thing. Sure.
Right. Exactly. Not to get like too philosophical, but people just have different preferences. So I went to college in Florida, so I still have a bunch of friends there. And some of them kind of look at me funny when I say that my favorite thing about Vermont is the weather. Because I love the skiing and I like the seasons and it's fun. There are all kinds of people who would be like, Vermont weather sounds terrible. Like, why would you do that to yourself? But some people just they like the warmth. They don't want to deal with winter. And so moving from Minnesota to Oklahoma, is a win for them. Air conditioning works pretty well. It kind of all depends on how you are defining quality of life for yourself.
I think the things that when I worked in the South, it was the school districts are much worse. They rank dead last if it's Oklahoma, and in a lot of those places, the roads are worse because your taxes are lower. There's not as much public amenities for those things, and yes, that's a trade-off that anybody makes. But in the shift for these industries and for these workers, is that a trade-off they're being forced to make by this thing? And should that be part of the conversation that we're having?
Well, I think I don't want to say it's beside the point. What I would say is that there are a lot of places in America that have a lot more going for them than is often acknowledged. So Mississippi has instituted some of the great reading reforms that have helped it become one of the leaders in education. like, that's cool. Like, it's just like, to me, having grown up in the South, it is like the coolest thing that Mississippi is now one of the like leaders in education. That like blows the 1990s version of me out of the water. That's like a thing now. So there's that. I would also say that like even like the Rust Belt, like lots of these places have more going for them than is often acknowledged. So like my wife's family's from Michigan. I go to Michigan all the time. It's lovely. Like Michigan is like northern Michigan in the summer is absolutely gorgeous. Hard to beat, exactly. And so part of me, I'm just very reluctant to talk about places in ways that sound like you're taking an L moving there.
Is that also part of this idea that the way that we understand, I know we're talking specifically about manufacturing because so is the administration, is all of that part of the old-fashioned notion that we are hanging on to when it comes to manufacturing as an industry and as manufacturing jobs?
So one of the things that I would, so sometimes you'll hear people on the right and a lot of their talk about economics and manufacturing and jobs is like, it's a deeply cultural thing, actually. It's like what they're really worried about is the decline of jobs that men can do and support a family on that job. And like, actually, I'm really sympathetic to concerns about that. I just think they're looking in the wrong sector. They're looking in manufacturing, and to me, it's construction, right? Like if you want, if I had a son, I have a 6-year-old daughter, but let's say I had a 17-year-old son and he was not a bookworm, I would strongly be pushing him to go into the trades. You could make good money as a plumber, as an electrician, as a house framer. All these things, they pay well. Those are good jobs. Those are working class jobs. Those are traditionally male industries. You work with your hands. Like the instinct to say, we need to make sure that there are good jobs so that people can raise a family. I'm totally on board with that. I just think you're looking in the wrong pond for that. Like you're looking in manufacturing and like the robots ate so many of those jobs, but like you're not going to robotize plumbing.
Right. Because you mentioned it in the article, and this is a common thing everywhere. When you hear the administration talk about reshoring these factories, they're not going to come back with 100 or 200 jobs. They're going to come back with 50 because you're not actually doing anything on the line. You're managing the robots.
Yeah. No, this is exactly it. One of the examples I gave in the article is Black & Decker is reshoring manufacturing facility back from abroad in the United States. They're going to North Carolina, not Pennsylvania. And they say that the line that would have 50 to 75 people on it abroad is going to have 10 to 12. So that's a big cut. And they think they can get it down to 3 or 4.
Yeah.
In China now, they have certain factories that are called dark factories. Have you heard of these?
Yes.
So they're dark factories, but for any of their listeners who don't know, they're dark because nobody works in them, and so they don't turn the lights on. The lights only come on for an hour or two a day while they do software updates and maintenance and pick things up or whatever.
Robots don't have eyes. They don't need to see. Yeah.
No, they don't need to see. Yeah, exactly. But that's how automated some areas of manufacturing are, that you can do dark factories. And so like it just, even if you did do this reshoring, you're not creating a bajillion jobs out of that.
So why hang on to this? And like, this is the thing that I was talking about from the president, is that he has this vision, and he has told previous economic advisors, Gary Cohn was one of them who wrote about this in his book, where he tried to get the president to understand that manufacturing is not going to come back in the same way. And this was a decade ago. And they was like, why do you insist on holding on to this idea? And he was like, it's just the way I think about manufacturing. And so why do we all collectively hold on to this?
So I'm going to say something. So a lot of things people say about Donald Trump are controversial or divisive, or people are want to argue with. I'm going to say something now that I think we can all agree on. He turns 80 next year. And you know who else is old? Joe Biden. And they're both, Biden was born in 42, Trump was born in 46. They came of age in an economy where you didn't have all these service jobs, and you had a lot more labor-intensive manufacturing. You know, all these robots. And they are from an era where good jobs mean manufacturing. And I just think it's got less to do with left-right between those two. And both of them are over 80 or near 80. And like, you know what? That happens, right? Like, I am sure I'm 38 now. I'm sure in 42 years, I will probably have some outdated notions about how the economy works. That's just how life goes. But this is the problem with electing people who are 80.
Right. I was going to say, because it's not just those two, right? It's
Yeah.
the entire senior leadership in, frankly, both parties.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm 33 and it's 2025, and I consistently continue to think that 1990 was only 10 years ago.
Oh,
right?
You know what my favorite is? One of my students a week or two ago made me feel about 100 years old because he referred to the 90s as the late 20th century.
Oh,
I was like, oh God. Oh,
like,
no.
not wrong,
No,
not wrong,
not wrong.
but just, just like I can't quite reach the knife in my back.
Yeah,
right?
Right. Yeah.
So it is this thing that it's just the people making the choices for us right now are old and they're stuck in that thing. That's their view of the world. So how do we better have this conversation then? How do we better, I mean, I guess bridge the divide between the North and the South, which sounds extremely late 1900s, right?
Right. Yeah.
But like, how do we have this conversation in a more productive way? Because I think, you know, people don't want to leave the idea of manufacturing this thing behind, but it almost feels like we have to.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the ways in which I think that you've really got to be able to talk to people like where they are, but also like sell them a vision, not just of a glorious past, but like a bright future. Right. So like working hours keep going down on average. Isn't it like nice that we like work less than we used to? Right. Isn't it nice that a lot of the dirtiest, worst jobs are automated now? Like, you know, you can see this in like farm labor. Right. So like my first job was on a farm and I picked squash and blueberries all summer and it was awful. Like this is how you know somebody's worked in farming. They know it sucks. But like I just saw maybe a month or two ago this like video of this like carrot picker machine and it just picks like hundreds of carrots a minute. And I'm like, cool. All right, let's automate the worst work so that humans don't have to do that. Right? Like that's cool if like nobody, you know, because like a lot of these like working class jobs, they like break people's bodies.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be cool if nobody had to have a body breaking job?
Absolutely.
Right? Like that would just be great. You know, wouldn't it be cool if we had really, really cheap electricity so that when you want to run your AC in the summer, it's close to free? Right? Like, wouldn't it be cool if we adopted all of the zoning reform and new housing technologies and a house didn't cost an arm and a leg? I think without like being a lot of us don't love like the ring of revolution. But there are like challenges. And so you want to be able to talk to people about like, okay, here's how we can solve the challenges in front of you. This is where I think like a lot of the abundance discourse among Democrats is really useful. I would love to see it become a thing where the two parties are arguing over who's better at abundance. Right? Like you've got a Democratic version of it that's like Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson kind of stuff. And a right-wing version that's not Donald Trump and take us back, but it's actually like, you know, how do we make America more like the South? Right? Like you can imagine a certain kind of Republican that isn't trying to recreate Youngstown 1975, but is like, hey, look, South Carolina's kicking butt.
Yeah. Can we make a Charleston 2020?
Right.
Everywhere.
That would be my hope, is that you get a version of this in both parties. Parties don't tend to reform unless they lose.
Yeah.
So my hope for the Republican Party is on ice until they lose. Among Democrats, I think you are getting a healthy conversation about how to not just be locked in the ideas of let's do FDR politics over and over and over again. Which is like no disrespect to FDR. We had certain huge problems in 1934, and I think the New Deal did a lot of cool stuff. But the challenges we have in 2025 are way different than the challenges we had in 1934. So I just don't think calling everything like ex-New Deal is like the most helpful.
If, let's say, Chuck Schumer, who I guess is the most senior member of the Democratic Party right now, he calls you and says, where do we start? What's the easiest inroad into this for you?
In the manufacturing itself, I think that the easiest thing, the place to start is permitting reform for electricity. So, because it's really important. We have all kinds of places in America who are great at making green energy. Tons of solar in the Southwest, tons of wind in places like Iowa, all down the center of the country. We don't have the ability to move that green energy from where it's made to where it's needed. And you can see charts on this of how many like electricity lines we need, and we don't have them and we're not building them. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. One idea that I have that I think is could be really helpful is, so FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they have the ability to basically do national siting for natural gas pipelines. So when we started doing the fracking revolution back in late aughts, early teens, FERC could just be like, okay, we're building this giant natural gas pipeline from Oklahoma to Virginia, and we can just like move it. Great. They don't have the same kind of authority for high capacity electricity transmission. So you can't build these like lines. And so we've got this like green energy popping up, but we don't have the way to move it. And it's just like, it's really bad. Like it's one of these things that, you know, I mean, that is the problem, I think, under discussed. That would be my first thing to talk to Schumer about, is like, we got to get some permitting reform for electricity transmission so that we can power manufacturing, so that we can have good jobs, so that energy doesn't cost people an arm and a leg, so that we can do data centers, so that we can do all the things we want to do for this bright future. You got to have the energy to do that. And right now, the big, like, I don't even want to call it Achilles heel because it's so much bigger than that. But like the big problem is the moving the electricity.
So that's the first place to start.
That's the first place to start.
It's funny. I read your article and walked away from it a little less hopeful than I was expecting, and came away from this conversation with way more hope for what we could do next.
Good.
This has been such a fantastic conversation, Gary.
I love hearing that. It's a little sad to me that my 900 word article in Washington Post made you sad. Because like, yeah, I mean, there's only so much you could say in an op-ed, but I'm glad I was able to expound a little more here and give you some more enthusiasm.
No, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Grant.
I want to thank Gary again for coming on the show. You can find a link to his Washington Post article and all the great work he's doing up at Middlebury in the show notes for this episode. And that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack to get access to all these great bonus articles I'm putting up there all the time. It is just $5 a month to be a paid subscriber to get access to those. And just a quick programming note, I guess you'd call it, for next week. There will be no episode of Make It Make Sense on Monday. I am out of town celebrating a family friend's graduation, so I won't be here to record the episode. But in the meantime, please keep sharing the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you next week.